Welcome to the Tonawanda City Schools Workplace Violence Prevention Program. Prevention of Workplace Violence Learning Objectives. Participants will learn the requirements of the Workplace Violence Prevention Act and Department of Labor regulations. Define workplace violence and understand the different types. Learn the key elements of Tonawanda City Schools District's Workplace Violence Prevention Policy and Program. Learn where our policy statement is posted and how to obtain a copy of our workplace violence program. Learn workplace violence risk factors and prevention efforts. Learn how to report incidents of workplace violence. Workplace Violence Prevention Act and NYS DOL regulations. Workplace Violence Prevention Act and NYS DOL regulations. NYS Labor Law, Section 27B, known as the Workplace Violence Prevention Act, was enacted in 2006. In 2009, NYS Department of Labor implemented regulations to accompany the Workplace Violence Prevention Act. These regulations can be found at 12 NYC RR 800.6 and are enforced by the NYS DOL. To help prevent workplace violence in public schools, on September 6, 2023, the governor signed legislation amending the Workplace Violence Prevention Law, extending coverage to elementary and secondary public education that was previously exempted. This was done by removing the exemption from the definition of employer in the law. The amendment of 12 NYC RR Part 800.6 has also been immediately authorized by the legislation. These changes are effective as of January 4th, 2024. Workplace Violence Prevention Act and NYS DOL regulations. The Act and NYS DOL regulations require public employers to develop and implement a workplace violence prevention program. The Tonawanda City School District established a workplace violence committee and appointed a coordinator, developed a workplace violence policy statement, performed a risk evaluation and determined workplace violence risk factors, developed a written workplace violence prevention program that establishes and implements a workplace violence incidents reporting and recording system, implements safeguards and control measures to protect employees from workplace violence, annually provides employees with information and training on workplace violence, performs an annual review of the workplace violence incident reports. Workplace Violence Prevention Act, Anti-Retaliation Protections. The Tonawanda City School District cannot take retaliatory action against any employee who exercises their rights under this law. Retaliatory action is a discharge, suspension, demotion, penalization, or discrimination against any employee, or other adverse employment action taken against an employee in the terms and conditions of employment. Workplace violence, definitions and categories. What is workplace violence? Any physical assault or acts of aggressive behavior occurring where a public employee performs any work-related duty in the course of employment, including but not limited to 1. Any verbal or physical attempt or threat to cause physical injury on an employee. 2. An intentional display of force giving an employee reason to fear or expect bodily harm. 3. Intentional, wrongful, and non-consensual physical contact that causes injury. 4. Stalking an employee with the intent of causing fear or harm to their physical safety and health. Workplace definition. NYS DOL regulations define a workplace as any permanent or temporary location outside an employee's home where an employee performs any work-related duty in the course of employment. Some examples include central office, classroom, field trip location, out-of-office meeting or conference, sporting events, school bus. Categories of violence. Type 1. Violent acts by criminals who have no other connection with the workplace but enter to commit a robbery or another crime. Type 2. Violence directed at employees by customers, clients, patients, students, inmates, or any others for whom an organization provides services. Categories of violence continued. Type 3. Violence against coworkers, supervisors, or managers by a current or former employee. Type 4. Violence committed in the workplace by someone who has a personal relationship with the employee, such as a boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, or domestic partner. Why do we care about verbal and physical violence in the workplace? Employees have a right to a safe and secure workplace. Workplace violence can impact employees' physical and mental well-being. Workplace violence interferes with the mission of the Tonawanda City School District. Workplace Violence Policy Statement. Workplace Violence Policy Statement. The Tonawanda City School District developed a written policy statement on our workplace violence prevention program that describes the goals, objectives, method for incident reporting, and how authorized employee representatives, AER, can participate in the workplace violence program. An AER could be a union representative or an employee designated by the employees. The policy statement can be found on the website with all the other policy documents. Workplace Violence Prevention Policy Statement. Overview. The district is committed to the safety and security of its employees. Workplace violence presents a serious threat to the safety of employees, students, parents, and visitors. The goal of this policy is to promote the safety and well-being of all people in the workplace. Acts of violence against district employees where any work-related duty is performed will be thoroughly investigated and appropriate action will be taken. All employees are responsible for creating an environment of mutual respect for each other, as well as students, parents, and visitors, following all applicable documents, and for assisting in maintaining a safe and secure work environment. This workplace violence prevention policy was developed in consultation with all authorized employee representatives and is designed to meet the requirements of the New York State labor law and highlights some of the elements that are found within the district's workplace violence prevention program, WVPP. Workplace Violence Policy Statement location. Our Workplace Violence Prevention Policy Statement is posted on the district website under BOE Policies and on the Workplace Violence Prevention page. Workplace Violence Prevention Program. Workplace Violence Prevention Program. The Workplace Violence Prevention Act and the NYS DOL regulations require the Tonawanda City School District to create a comprehensive written workplace violence prevention program with participation of the committee member. Workplace Violence Prevention Program. As required by the Act, our Workplace Violence Prevention Program includes risk factors identified in the risk evaluation, methods and means to prevent workplace violence, and implemented safeguards addressing each identified risk factor, hierarchy of control measures which ranks safeguards from most effective to least effective, incident reporting system, employee training plan, a plan to review workplace incidents once a year, and update our program as needed with the committee. Workplace Violence Prevention Program. Our Tonawanda City School District's written Workplace Violence Prevention Program can be found on our website under the Workplace Violence Prevention page. https www.tonawanda.csd.org/page/workplace violence prevention. You may also request a copy by emailing the WPV coordinator, Jesse Donner. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, Risk Factors Identified. The Act and NYS DOL regulations require a list of the risk factors identified along with the methods to address them. This was completed after the safety evaluations were completed and the committee met. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, Hierarchy of Controls. Hierarchy of controls. A hierarchy of controls is a safety professional term referring to a ranking of the safeguards that an employer can use to protect employees from harm in order of preference and effectiveness. There are three main types of safeguards or control measures that an employer can implement to protect employees from recognized workplace violence risk factors. Engineering controls are considered the most effective, followed by work practice controls, and then personal protective equipment. Engineering controls eliminate or reduce the risk of workplace violence through physical changes to the workplace. Examples of engineering controls include increased lighting in remote areas, designing secure building access, installing security hardware, eliminating isolated work areas, installing drop safes. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, Hierarchy of Controls continued. Work practice controls eliminate or reduce the risk of workplace violence through changes to organizational policies, procedures, and work practices. Examples of work practice controls include increased staffing, employment of security personnel, implementing building access control procedures, for example, requiring badges to enter, instituting communication procedures across shifts or classes to share information regarding agitated clients or students, providing information to employees on the criminal history or violence of clients, inmates, or customers, reducing customer wait times, providing employees with personal alarms, providing cell phones to employees in the field, training employees on de-escalation and how to recognize precursors to violence. Personal protective equipment, PPE, is generally considered the least effective control measure, but may be needed to enhance other control measures or minimize potential injury severity when other control measures fail. Examples of personal protective equipment include eye, hand, arm, and face protection in different forms. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, Incident Reporting System. Any Tonawanda City School employee who becomes aware of a physical assault, threatening behavior, or verbal abuse at the workplace must immediately report the facts and circumstances of the violent incident to their supervisor and or the workplace violence coordinator, Jesse Donner. In the event that an employee witnesses or is involved in an incident of violence in which there is an immediate threat to the employee's safety or the safety of others, or where a serious injury has occurred, the employee will immediately call 911 to obtain law enforcement and or medical assistance and notify their immediate supervisor. The supervisor and or the coordinator delegate will immediately conduct a preliminary inquiry into the facts and circumstances of the incident and make a prompt report to the Assistant Superintendent of Administrative Services using the incident report found on our website. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, Reporting Protocol. If a pattern of workplace violence incidents develops that involve criminal conduct or serious injury, Tonawanda City Schools will develop a protocol with the police to ensure that violent crimes committed against employees in the workplace are promptly investigated and appropriately prosecuted. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, Reporting of Workplace Violence Incidents. The Tonawanda City School District developed and maintains a workplace violence incident report that records for each workplace violence incident the following information at minimum: workplace location where incident occurred, time of day shift when incident occurred, detailed description of the incident, including events leading up to the incident and how the incident was resolved, names and titles of employees involved, name or other identifier of others involved, nature and extent of injuries arising from the incident, names of witnesses. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, reporting of workplace violence incidents. Our incident report form can be found here. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, reporting and protecting privacy. For incidents where privacy is a concern, the report will replace the employee's name with Privacy Concern Case. The following incidents are to be treated as a privacy concern case: an injury or illness to an intimate body part or the reproductive system, an injury or illness resulting from a sexual assault, mental illness, HIV infection, needle stick injuries and cuts from sharp objects that are or may be contaminated with another person's blood or other potentially infectious material, other injuries or illnesses if the employee independently and voluntarily requests their name not be entered on the report. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, record keeping of workplace violence incidents. The workplace violence incident reports must be maintained and reviewed once a year. We will conduct a review of the workplace violence incidents report at least once a year to identify trends in the types of workplace violence incidents that have occurred and evaluate how effective actions and safeguards to reduce workplace violence have been. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, Employee Information and Training. The Act and NYS DOL regulations require Tonawanda City Schools to provide each employee with information and training on the risks of workplace violence in their workplace locations. Training must occur at the time of the employee's initial assignment, at least once a year after that, whenever significant changes have been made to our workplace violence prevention program. Workplace Violence Prevention Program, Employee Information and Training. At a minimum, the training must include the requirements of the Workplace Violence Prevention Regulations, the risk factors identified in the risk evaluation, with the exception of information kept confidential for security reasons, measures that employees can take to protect themselves from workplace violence, specific procedures implemented to protect employees such as incident alert and notification procedures, appropriate work practices, emergency procedures, use of security alarms and other devices, the location of the written workplace violence program. Use and copyright statement. This curriculum was initially developed with New York State funding and intended for training New York State employees. Permission for use by public employers in New York State has been given by the Office of Employee Relations. Prevention of workplace violence. Thank you. I am your narrator, Bob Bozek. Thank you for taking this course.